Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. Today we've got a story about a church pastor, but first a story from Block and Awe. Don't open the soda until I say so. This happened years and years ago when my siblings and I were kids. We were sitting down for dinner, and we had an unopened 2-liter of soda to go with our meals that night. Somewhat unusual in our house, so it was a bit of a treat. As we're sitting down, one of the kids opens the soda and releases that familiar hiss sound. For some reason, rough day, hangry, my dad, who is normally a very laid-back, chill dude, barks at us, "Don't open the soda until I say so." To this day, I'm not sure what the problem was. Freshness? Afraid we'd spill it? Either way, it was weird and unexpected. I think he apologized soon after, but we decided not to let him live it down. Soon after, we started asking my dad every time we needed to open a 2-liter at a meal. He smiles and makes a big deal of checking out his, sometimes imaginary, watch and going, "Wait, not yet, hang on, go." To this day, sometimes his grown children will call him and ask him when to open the soda. From our own homes or even another state. I think it's really great that what started as a really off-putting and grumpy moment turned out to be like a loving and touching thing, and let's be real, kind of an excuse to just call up your dad and have a cutesy moment with them just for the heart-filling joy of it. Do you have a relative or a friend that you have these little in-jokes or in-moments that you can share with them? Somebody you could text or call almost right now and just have like a little back and forth that's like second nature? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is from Educational Opposite 3. School bus drivers must follow the rules. As a teen in the early 80s, I babysat for a couple that lived down the road. My regular bus driver would let me get off at their house on the days I had to watch their kids. Then he retired and we had a substitute bus driver for the rest of the year. She refused to let me off anywhere but my own driveway. Wouldn't take a note from my parents or anything. It was less than a mile, but still annoying to walk back. About a month later, she forgot to stop at my driveway to let me off. When I walked to the front of the bus, she said she thought that I wasn't on the bus that day and proceeded to stop at the next house and open the door to let me out. I refused and made that lady back up the 50 feet to my driveway. Still makes me laugh whenever I think of it. Let me tell you, all throughout elementary school, all the way to high school, I had to ride the bus. And there is nothing worse than getting a substitute bus driver. Oftentimes, they very hardly know the route. They have to ask the kids for directions. It didn't help that I was the last stop, by the way, so imagine a bus that's full of like 50 plus kids or whatever, screaming, yelling, antsy to get home, and some substitute all the way at the front of the bus is asking and calling out if there's somebody getting off at whatever spot that I usually get off at. I couldn't even really make out what they were saying because the bus is crowded and people are talking. So at the end, when I'm like the last one left, I speak up and say, "Oh, yeah, my stop is at so-and-so," and they go, "Oh, well, why didn't you tell me, blah, blah, blah." It might not seem like a big deal, but for me back then, I was super shy, super anxious, and anytime a substitute bus driver came along, it just sucked, for one reason or another. By the way, if you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons down below so you never miss any of my daily videos. Every video has awesome stories like our next one from Throws a Pen Away. Church pastor wanted to publicly shame me. This happened when I was about 12. I grew up in a Christian church that is very strict about rules of conduct, including how women are supposed to dress. In some larger cities, they're more lenient, but in the suburban area where I lived, they had no tolerance for anything that deviated from the standard. Youth service was on Sunday mornings, and it included anyone from ages 4 to 18. There was nothing fun about it. We had to sit through the entire sermon, pray, recite Bible verses, and sing hymns when told to. The kids would obviously get bored and find ways to tease each other, tell jokes, pass notes back and forth, and so on. But not me. I was trying really hard to feel accepted. They already gave me a hard time because I wore nice clothes, not fancy or expensive, just too colorful for their taste. And I wanted to prove that I was worthy, so every Sunday I would sit quietly and refuse to engage in whatever the other girls around me were doing. The pastor noticed the giggles and scolded our group. They stopped and continued as soon as he turned around, and that pissed him off even more. So he pointed in our direction from the pulpit and yelled, "The three of you over there," that included me. It took me a minute to notice because I was looking down. "Come up here right now." This is very uncommon because the pulpit is reserved for church leaders, all men, but he wanted to put on a show. We went up and he told us to kneel down and recite the entire Lord's Prayer, one at a time, in front of the entire church. "That'll teach you to be quiet during service," he said. The boys on the other side started chuckling but stopped quickly because they didn't want to be next. I was livid. I hadn't done anything wrong, yet I was being punished with this kind of humiliation. The girl on my right went first. I was in the middle, so I would be next. Time for the malicious compliance. You wanted us to be quiet? Fine, I'll be quiet. 2 minutes went by of absolute silence. He ushered me. "Psst, sister, it's your turn." 2 more minutes and I continued in silence. The girl on my left discreetly poked me with her elbow. I kept my head up and didn't say a thing. I don't know how much longer the awkward silence lasted, but eventually he caved in, got up, and sent us back to our seats. He never bothered me ever again. A few years later, he was exposed for running some shady money-making business and had to step down from his leadership role in the church. Bonus MC, the church prohibited women from cutting their hair. My mother thought that was a stupid rule and allowed us to keep our hair at medium length. After I left the church in my mid-teens, I decided to let my hair grow super long, way past the hips. But by then, I was wearing secular clothes, wearing makeup, etc. The church people would see me and say, "You would be so great as one of us." For a church that claims to be free from vanity and worldly influences, I guess appearances are more important than behavior. Now I know exactly how OP feels, granted mine wasn't comparable to up in front of the entire church. But I remember a time in my kindergarten class where a kid's pants fell down and they started crying, and I got thrown under the bus and blamed that I pulled his pants down. So the teacher decided to have every single kid sit all around this big square rug, have me stand at one end of it, and tell the class and admit that I did it. She has everybody sit around the square rug, has 2 classmates go off to the far corner of the room with me to talk it over. I guess to, hash out what I was going to say. Both kids tell me, "Just say you did it." And I'm standing there like, I didn't do it at all. So we get called back and I just go straight on autopilot and I say, "No, I didn't do it." So the teacher sends us back into the corner. The kids continue to say, "Just say that you did it." So we go back. I say that I did it. I get punished. No recess, no treat at the end of the day, and I didn't even do it. My whole class sat around on this square rug staring at me, and me straight up having to say, "Yes, I pulled that kid's pants down." I really liked that teacher, but that was a big blotch in the memory of that class. This next story is from Astronomer Sasson, too casual for work. For context, I have a few piercings, dyed hair, rainbow glasses, and a sticker-clad cane. People are going to stare anyway, may as well give them something to stare at. I'm also pretty casual. I afford expected respect to people, but especially since I work in fast food and only have a few coworkers, I, and my other coworkers and managers, don't see a reason to be excessively professional. I was hired with all of these visible and have never been told to remove them. Both GM and regional manager know. A new manager got hired. She met me about a week ago. Within 3 days of meeting me, she started commenting on a lot of my behavior and appearance, to the point of demanding I fix my appearance immediately when I told her I didn't see how my appearance affected my ability to do my job. Now, I have no problem removing the piercings or dyeing my hair a more natural color, but my glasses are pretty necessary for my current situation. I can sort of see about 4 or 5 feet away with them. Without them, I'm basically useless, and nothing can fix it at this point, so I've stopped bothering with an ophthalmologist, and I speak to my coworkers the way they speak to me. We're all pretty casual and friendly. Also, the only thing she noted that was maybe against policy is the piercings, but we're technically allowed 2 stud piercings, and that's what I have. Either way, whatever, I was fine with taking them out, but in a stroke of genius, I went, "Alright." I took out my piercings and tucked my hair into my hat. she decided to insist my glasses were just aesthetic, because of course, real people who need glasses only wear plain black or metal frames. So I took them off, got sent back to work. At this point, everything is gray, so one of my coworkers led me back to my spot on the line. She then got on me about my performance dropping and accused me of doing it to spite her. I told her I couldn't see, and she started nagging me about how I needed to treat her with respect. She's not my friend, and once again commented on how casually I talk to people. So I drew inspiration from one of my favorite video game characters and started speaking like Fischl. Not well, but enough that it was obvious what I was doing. Alas, without my spectacles, 'tis but a blur. I also ignored her or pretended not to understand if she used any informal terms toward me. These shenanigans continued until another manager came in, saw me without my glasses, and got on the new manager and told me to put everything back to normal. Apparently I look like a legal issue waiting to happen without my glasses and piercings. I overheard things like, "I just don't feel appreciated for the work I do here," and OP was being intentionally obstinate. I also overheard the older manager tell her that I am, in fact, legally blind and had every right to pursue legal action for an ADA violation. I don't know the laws well enough to know if it was, nor would I have had the money to sue, but the idea that someone would assume I could made me feel a bit satisfied. I ended up getting my ability to wear my piercings returned too, endorsed by the GM and everything. Not the thing I cared about, but a nice pro. I'm pretty sure I've angered the new manager though. Oh well, I don't talk to her. She doesn't talk to me, and that's fine. She's been the subject of criticism by my coworkers though, and I'm pretty sure if your entire store has 7 active employees, you're not going to last long there when none of them like you. I mean, going beyond the scope of whether these people like them or not, let's be real, what is the average job duration of a manager who works in a fast food place like this? I feel like I've heard enough to say confidently that it seems to be 2 possibilities. One is it could possibly be like Harry Potter Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher level, where every single year there's a new manager just shuffling in, or that manager is going to just somehow end up being there for 15 years. It's probably going to be the first one for somebody like that, not gonna lie. And our final story of the day is from Striking Marketing 39, the rental car faulty fuel gauge. I took a rental car yesterday with a plan to drive about 310 miles. The car agency gave me the keys and fuel gauge showed a full tank of gas. After about 10 minutes, I could see that the fuel gauge was showing there's only a half tank worth of gas. I felt very annoyed, thought it might be a transient error. I went to a nearby gas station to refuel and check if the fuel gauge is broken or if it is indeed that there's less gas in the tank. Upon refueling, I found out that there was a little over a half tank worth of fuel when the rental car agency gave me the car. I was super annoyed, but had a long way to drive. So I didn't think about calling the rental car agency and expressing my frustration. Today on my return trip, I realized I don't need to fill the tank full while returning the car. I stopped for refueling before the rental car return, carefully filled up the half tank, then again 0.5 gallon more. Boom, the fuel gauge started to show full tank again. I returned the car to the rental car agency and got an invoice which states the starting and ending fuel status as full. Felt oddly satisfied. I mean, I totally understand why OP would be upset here, but would you say that OP is a little bit of a jerk for not making sure to mention that the fuel gauge is broken? Like, yeah, it's nice that OP wasn't on the hook for any extra fees or charges or anything, but just isn't that something you want to give a little bit of a heads up on? I say think about how you felt when you realized the situation at hand, and then think about the next person that's going to end up getting that car and having to deal with the same thing because nobody mentioned the faulty fuel gauge. But hey, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's not your responsibility. And I mean, you're not going to lose any sleep over it, it's not going to affect you, so oh well. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another compliance story that was way crazier than this one, click on that left video. Or if you missed my latest video, check out the one on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.